All right. Welcome back to another great edition of Maxon TV. I have the esteemed Brent Bolden. He founded New Media Advisors. Brent, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, happy to be here, Max.
Absolutely. Why don't you give us a little bit about what New Media Advisors is and tell us about how you started it?
Yeah, New Media Advisors is a digital consulting organization. We work primarily in the financial services space with helping folks solve digital problems. A lot of organizations, COVID has sort of pressed the fast forward button on all things digital, and organizations need to drive demand in digital channels. And a lot of them don't have a ton of capabilities. A lot of them have very small teams. And so my partner and I have 10, 15 years experience in digital and in financial services. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity to bring that expertise to bear on some organizations that could really benefit from it at this point in time.
Yeah, because your background, I wouldn't just call it any background. You were freaking the head of marketing for Choice Hotels. I mean, that's no small feat. That's kind of ridiculous. You manage what, $130 million ad spend?
Yeah, something around that. Choice Hotels, I spent 2.5 years as the head of marketing there. They have a significant ad budget, both online and offline, traditional, digital, TV. 7,000 locations around the world. And so that was a great experience. And then prior to that, ran digital marketing at Bank of America for 8 years and budgets, similar budgets, if not larger. And so, yeah, I've had the good experience of running big programs. And I feel like that's somewhat what gets us in the door when we want to talk to some of these organizations. I think a lot of organizations look at companies like Choice and Bank of America and think, wow, if we can talk to the people that ran the organizations there, they probably have some insight to bring to bear on our problems. And fortunately, we've been able to help a good number of companies so far.
That's primarily why you started, because you're like, there's a huge demand, nobody's really meeting it. Might as well just start it, as opposed to like doing it for other people. You just might as well do it for yourself, right?
Yeah, my partner and I, we've been together for 10 years. He was sort of my right-hand person at both Bank of America and at Choice. And we have been talking for years about sort of what it would be like to step out of corporate America and try this on our own. We had lots of digital partners and agencies and consultancies that we worked with through the years. And we saw what they were doing and sort of the ability to be entrepreneurial and take something from nothing to something. And we often would sit, we'd be traveling together or something and sit at the bar late at night and talk about the fact that we should try this someday. And when COVID happened and travel slowed to a halt, and you could sort of read the writing on the wall that wasn't going to be coming back in the immediate future. And so we felt like the time was right. So we started this in August of last year.
Right. The question is, why financial services though? Why not anything else?
Honestly, we started anything else, right? We started with this approach that we were going to be digital advisors to C-level and senior marketing folks, regardless of industry. And it was a little bit of crickets. I think people want a specialist. They don't want a generalist. And so, as I mentioned, we went through a program called the 90-Day Boutique. It's a very, very good program. It sort of teaches you how to sell yourself as a consultant. And one of the things they encouraged us to do was niche down. And so, in looking at how we could position ourselves to be successful, 8.5 years at Bank of America, leading digital marketing and big, huge programs there, that's sort of, we're the Bank of America guys. And so that allowed us to sort of get entree into some organizations, and that's when traction really started. As I said, we probably could have gone another direction. We could have gone travel. We could have gone some other industries, but financial services is a little bit always on. It doesn't slow down nearly as much as, say, travel when something like COVID happens. And so it was sort of a number of circumstances that led to that. But, having that big credential at the biggest bank in the world or the second largest bank in the world, that gets you in the door at a lot of places. And so we felt like that would be the best way to get traction.
Yeah, I'm a customer, definitely of Bank of America. So why, financial services is very difficult as far as compliance. Like, do you constantly run into hurdles about what you can post or say or do in an ad, and like you want to say something, but they won't let you say anything? Is that like a real big problem?
It's a huge problem. I'm glad to be on the outside looking in at the moment because, there were periods of time in those 8 years at the bank where I would probably spend half my week in compliance, legal, risk meetings, either explaining something over and over again to a different subset of partners, or going through risk mitigation strategies, or answering on why something didn't work exactly as anticipated and we got feedback from customers on it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a highly regulated industry. I think probably only healthcare would be worse in terms of really having to mind your P's and Q's. I remember when I first got to Choice Hotels, a question I asked was, when is our risk and compliance meetings? And they were like, we don't have that. And I was like, wow. And it almost felt like I was, there were no rules. Of course there were. We had to go through legal partners, and we still had to, run it up the approval chains and inside the organization, but nothing like what I was used to in banking, for sure.
Yeah. So what's funny about that is actually my twin brother was in compliance for I think it was Bank of Tokyo. It's like the really big one, MUF something, whatever.
Yeah.
His job was to tell people like you no. Regardless of what you're asking, the answer is no. Long story short, he realized this is the dumbest thing ever. So he was there for like 4 seconds and booted out. Today's a data analyst anyways, but for a healthcare company, which is kind of funny. So he was in the two highly regulated businesses, which my dad was in financial services. So they wouldn't allow him to essentially almost have a Facebook even. God forbid he should write, I like apples, can be construed as I like Apple stock, lose $100,000 and then sue the company. Totally hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, banks, they are professional risk mitigation organizations. They try to mitigate the risk on investments. They try to mitigate the risk on the organization. There's a lot of people that, particularly with the big banks, and particularly when you're going through something like the 2008, 2009 timeframe, where people's having their houses foreclosed, there's a lot of targets on you. And so the bank has a vested interest in minimizing risk. And so I often felt like there was people whose job it was to say no to me. And so, it took a little of the air out of the room sometimes, but we still were able to do a lot of interesting things, and a lot of work that we're really proud of, and that has stood the test of time, stuff that's still going there.
So are the companies that you're working with are like the Raymond James of the world, or more a smaller operation?
Both. We're not working, it's a two-man shop, right? So currently, at least. We've started reaching the point where we're probably going to need to bring on some contract help and so forth. But we're working in that sort of regional bank level. I think Raymond James would probably be at the upper end of our capabilities to service as two people, right? And we certainly couldn't service, a Bank of America or a Chase or a Wells Fargo, at least not, we'd have to be one of several providers. But when you get into the mid-tier regional bank or large community bank or large credit union, that's sort of the strike zone for us. If you go too small, they don't invest in any of the stuff we do. And so
Right.
it needs to be a certain size, but it can't be too big, or else we just don't have the manpower.
Right. Well, you can't talk to somebody, what's your budget? Well, about $1,000. That doesn't work.
Right. And we have that frequently. We talk to people and they're like, look, my budget, my CEO says he wants to try digital, and our budget this year is $5,000. And we're like, that's not fit for what we're going to be able to do. Because honestly, it's just not enough to move the needle.
100%. So when people tell, playing devil's advocate, someone could say hypothetically, doing advertisements for a Bank of America, of a big hotel chain, people already recognize the brand. So when they see an ad, it's a little bit easier as far as clicking on it. But as far as working with a brand, maybe not necessarily everyone's heard of, is there an especially hard hurdle to pass just with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different hurdle. To your point, when I was at Bank of America, we often said, and it was anecdotal, I don't know if it's actually true, but one in two households in America has a banking product with Bank of America, be it a bank account, a credit card, a home loan, et cetera. And so we never had this brand recognition problem, but we did have a consideration and a brand favorability problem. And because, like I said, during the downturn and so forth, there was a lot of foreclosing going on, and people were angry at banks for overlending, or maybe not being as conservative as people would have preferred us be. And so, we had to overcome that hurdle of like, yeah, they know who we are and they don't want anything to do with us. And so that was a challenge. Choice is a little different challenge because people view hotels a little bit more as a commodity. As long as you're something that they've heard of and they've not had a horrible experience, oftentimes it's a get your message right there at the moment of booking. And are you close to where they're going? Is it, going to be a comfortable room that has the amenities that they're looking for? And then can you get your message in front of somebody at the moment of truth? And so there was a different sort of problem set. And then now when we're dealing with companies in a smaller context, those companies have different problems altogether. Like you said, people have never heard of them, or if they have heard of them, they think that it's too small to meet their needs, or they're very geographically focused. So how do you spend dollars wisely in a 2-county radius? Or how do you, get your name out there, but you're not trying to compete with the national players, but you're in the same vertical as some of these national players. And so, if I'm a community bank in Milwaukee, how do I compete with the large mega banks that are also in Milwaukee? And so, honestly, we spent a lot of time talking about own channels and sort of driving things like content production and SEO and social media and the places where you're not getting spent into oblivion.
Right. So when you go into these regional banks, I would say, I'm sure, have they already had, let's say, a social media company before they just didn't do the job, so they're switching over to you? Or are you like the first person they've ever spoken to about social media or anything like that?
Both. Sometimes we talk to people that have, they've got and we're not trying to be a permanent agency. One of the things we tried to do when we positioned ourselves early on is tell people that our goal is not to come in and stay forever. Our goal is to come in, take a look at what you're doing, bring a methodology to bear where we can sort of teach you to fish a little bit and teach you how to organize yourself, what good looks like, what are your internal processes, educate your team if you have one. If not, we can sort of do some of the work for you and get your program on rails, and then we're going to walk away. We're not trying to be like this agency that stays forever and ever and ever. I mean, I've worked with agencies at both Bank, Choice, and other places that have been there 10 plus years. And so I always thought that was weird. And so one of the ways we're trying to sort of position ourselves is we want to come in and help people be successful, but our goal is not to sort of just, permanently attach ourselves to you. And so sometimes we come in and the agency that they're working with is still there, and we're just coming in, bringing additional perspective and expertise. Like I said, a lot of companies value the fact that we've done this at big companies before, and we sort of have that credential that, yeah, I'd love to talk to somebody that's done it at one of these huge companies, because we're 4 or 5 years behind where they are now, and there's a lot of learning that we can apply to what we're doing. And so, like I said, sometimes it's the first person social, almost everybody's done social. Not everybody's invested in SEO before, and they know they need to, but they don't, they bought a tool, or they had a freelance consultant that came in and gave them some keywords to put in their copy, but they really don't understand the blocking and tackling of SEO. And so that it's more often that we are the first they've talked to in that space than it is in, say, something like social.
Do you find that SEO is when you go into a company, what's the biggest challenge or misnomer that people think about marketing, and what you actually need to fix in the business?
The biggest challenge, I think, is the level setting on spending, right? I think we talked about it a minute ago, where people have a tiny budget of $5,000. And if that's the size of organization that you're in, 5,000 is almost extreme, but maybe some companies have a $50,000 or a $60,000 budget, and they've been allocating it across 3 or 4 channels for years. And you come in and you're like, wow, that's a very small budget, and it's really hard to move the needle in search or in display or paid social at that spend level. And to them, they've been sort of investing those dollars. That's been sort of their normal for a period of time. And so coming in and sort of right sizing on, there's a level of spend that it takes to sort of reach a certain level of sophistication and a certain level of performance, and sort of communicating that in a tactful way, because we don't want to come in and be like, look, if you don't have $100 million, we can't do it, because almost no one has that. So, but if you're spending $1,000 a month, and that's the most marketing budget you have, like, realistically, that's not something we can be totally effective with, because it's just not enough to invest in the tools and processes and content development and the stuff that's required to be successful in digital.
Is it more of like that, let's say I'm a business owner and I was running $50,000-$60,000 a month in ads. And so, I mean, for me, I'd be on top of, okay, I'm spending this, how much am I making? The companies that you're working with, it just seems like they just kind of just not care and just keep spending 50,000 as far as you said, not moving the needle? Is it just a lack of just data that they have, or just tracking for themselves to understand, like, is this working or is it not, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Having come out of some of these larger companies, I wasn't entirely aware of the ecosystem and how it works. We bumped into some interesting things. There's a few companies, these large television organizations that run the, you know, WXYZ in whatever town. They also have digital advertising arms, and so a lot of the smaller players, the way that company makes money is they go out and they get 100 mom and pop organizations, including some of these smaller banks in a metropolitan area, and cobble it all together into one fairly large media buy, and they're buying for everybody, and you're getting really generic and really high level performance information. But hey, your CEO sees you on xyz.com and is pleased that we're able to sort of, for a pretty low amount of spend, get some awareness out there. I think it is pretty common. It's interesting. The more money, in my experience, the more money an organization spends, the closer they're watching. If you're spending at a pretty low level, you're not expecting to get like really specific reporting. You're just expecting to sort of get some presence. And oftentimes it's almost like a check the box type thing where, the goal here isn't to drive, 2,000 credit cards at $100 a pop. The goal is to be able to go into the board meeting every month and show 10 ad placements across the web, and to have, a TV sponsorship of a Sunday morning news show or something along, you know what I mean? It's more of like, we're just doing this to sort of indicate and demonstrate that we're getting our brand name out there, but we're not really doing high fidelity performance marketing.
You're saying not necessarily on an ROI standard, it's more brand awareness?
Yeah, because if you were really getting down to the ROI, it's hard to. It's almost like you have to spend a certain amount to fine tune a program and start optimizing it to drive an ROI. And if below that amount, you're kind of just. It's hard to find partners. Oftentimes, like I said, these organizations have one or two people in marketing, and they can't really do this digital stuff themselves, and so they have to find a partner that's willing to work at that budget level. And sometimes the trade-off there is you're not going to get a lot of ROI reports, or you're not going to get a lot of details on what this spend is doing, but you will see your brand on a bunch of websites, and we will give you a sort of quarterly report that shows all the places that you've appeared, and sometimes that's good enough.
Right. So now I kind of want to shift over a little bit to you being as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. What has been your biggest challenge so far? Because before, when you were working, you didn't have to necessarily go out and get clients. Now you're running the show. Has that been your biggest challenge, or is there something else?
I don't know if I can easily answer what's the biggest challenge. There's been a number of challenges. I've spent 25 years in corporate America prior to this. And so I often joke with my wife, sometimes it feels like I'm just pretending to work. You come in here and you get on your computer every day, and there's no HR training, there's no risk and compliance, there's no anything. You're it. Whatever you're doing on your computer is it, and it's been a mindset adjustment from that perspective. There's been an ego element, if I'm being really candid with you. I mean, I think going from being a executive at a big company and having vendors sort of wine and dine you and fall all over themselves to get your time and attention, to now people don't even want to return your phone call. People that 6 months ago or 2 years ago were really close partners, or it's a little bit of what can you do for me, and I understand that, but it is an ego blow, because you're like, wow, I've gone from being something significant at some big company to being just this sort of on the outs person doing my own thing. But it does require a mindset shift, because success in what I'm doing now and success in what I used to do are two different things. And so now I'm trying to reframe things as like, wow, I've created something, I started at 0 and now I'm, 0 plus X. And that's all through the hard work and dedication of myself and my partner. And so we have to, it's reframing your mindset a little bit.
Right. That's a really good point, especially now. If you are in essentially almost practically any business, I mean, you probably something stopped one way, shape, form, or another. So you had to deal with something you probably never dealt with before, and you do have to change your mindset. I think that's really key.
Yeah.
So as far as from a marketing standpoint, is there anything, whether big or small, something that everybody should know about marketing?
I think one of the things I've experienced everywhere I've gone is that marketing is treated as discretionary spending. Everybody thinks it's a little bit of, we're going to make a marketing budget, and then when we hit bumps in the road in the fiscal year, that's the first place we'll turn to sort of almost treat it like a cash machine. Like that's stuff we can turn off easily. We'll turn it back on when we, get more funding, or the board approves more spend, or things turn around. And the expectation is that you can sort of start and stop and just sort of maintain momentum, and that's just not true. Even a big company, if you turn marketing off, it doesn't take very long before your sort of messaging starts to decay. And so you're digging yourself in a hole. You're going to have to spend to get out of that hole, and spending to get out of the hole to get back to even. It's going to be twice as expensive to get sort of where you were before you stopped. And so it just, I think the whole notion that marketing is something that you can turn on and off easily, and sort of pick up where you left off, and performance doesn't get all that impacted. It's just not true. I think there's a creative element to marketing, where staying on and maintaining a hum in the market is something that is valuable, that gets underestimated.
Yeah, it's quite funny that you say that, because I had a gentleman on here. I think it was one of my first interviews. His name is Ken Moskowitz. He's the founder of Ad Zombie, so he essentially writes ad copy. And so one of the things he mentioned, and this was already in the beginning of the pandemic, was, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not. The way I remember it is that for those, when there's like a tragedy or something, let's say '08, and the companies that, a lot of companies just turned everything off, because what's the point? But the companies that still remained kept their marketing going, even though people weren't necessarily buying from you today. When everything was all said and done, they ended up doing 2 or 3 times better when everything was done than everybody else. Do you find that to be true? And essentially, just don't stop your market, let it continue.
Yeah, particularly in an industry like financial services, because how often do you change banks, or how often do you buy a new credit card, or get a home loan? It's like I think, again, anecdotal, but we used to think at a bank that it was like once every 5 to 7 years. And so the marketing that you're doing at any moment in time is not to try to generate the sale that's going to happen tomorrow, because for the vast majority of your audience, that sale is at some point in the future. And so the goal is to stay in the consideration set almost permanently, so that when they are in these moments, you're there. And so it's a little different in hotels. Like I said, there it's a little bit of a race to sort of insert yourself as the last touch before booking. I want to be the last thing you see before you hit book. And so it's a little different, but even still, I think the value of being on and being present is underestimated in most organizations.
Right. And so, as far as any social media channels on to advertise on, where do you feel people should be? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Is something, Snapchat, anything? Kind of where should every brand be, essentially?
Well, I mean, I think Facebook is the place that you start. I've and a saying I've had every place I've been recently is, if there was a street corner in the world that had 2 billion people on it, you would be scrambling to build a restaurant, or whatever business you're in, you'd be scrambling to build on that street corner. And Facebook is that. You can sort of argue whatever's going on in the political and landscape, or whether whether you endorse their practices or not, but from a purely business and advertising perspective, it's a highly efficient place to advertise. I think Twitter has some appeal to certain audiences. I think it's a little harder to the ad units aren't as robust, and the targeting and the audience is smaller, and I've just had better success on Facebook. If I was going in a younger demographic, I think Instagram and Snap and TikTok and some things like that would be places that I would look. I've advertised on Snapchat and Instagram and had good results. I've never advertised on TikTok, and I think I'm hearing from people in the industry that it's good and that it works really well. I think that's probably product specific. I don't know if you could sell a credit card or a checking account there, but you could probably sell some tennis shoes or some fashion products or some makeup or something along those lines, because that's the sort of nature of the people, the mindset that people are in when they're on that platform.
Right, right, 100%. Well, before we end off, is there anything we haven't covered maybe you'd like to share with everyone?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground here in a short amount of time. I think it's yeah, I mean, I think we've covered most of what we had planned on talking about.
There we go. So, well, Brent, I really do appreciate you coming on and taking the time to be here. And you're always welcome back anytime you want.
All right, Max. We'll see you on LinkedIn.
All right, there we go.
Okay, take care, man.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.